What happened backstage at Johnny Carson's final show would shock even his most devoted fans. Because while 55 million Americans watched him say goodbye that night, what they saw was barely half the story. The real farewell, the one without cameras, the one that nearly fell apart a dozen times before it even aired. That's what nobody talks about. And once you know the truth, you'll never watch that famous finale the same way again. May 22nd, 1992. The date is burned into television history. But here's what's strange. NBC executives begged Carson to do his finale during February sweeps when advertising rates get set, when the money is biggest. He refused, wouldn't budge, wouldn't even explain why. Just said May 22nd, and that's final. For months, nobody understood. The scheduling team was baffled. His producers were confused. Even his closest friends had no idea why that specific date mattered so much to a man who'd spent 30 years being accommodating about everything. The truth didn't come out until years after his death. May 22nd was his son Richard's birthday. Richard, who had died in a car accident just 1 year earlier. The entire finale, watched by more people than the moon landing, was Johnny's secret tribute to a son he'd lost. A private grief wrapped inside a public farewell. And he never told anyone. Not the network, not the crew. Just his lawyer and his producer. That's the kind of man Johnny Carson was, carrying unimaginable pain while smiling for America. But that hidden heartbreak was just the beginning of what really happened that night. 3 hours before the show went live, there was chaos. Former President Ronald Reagan was already in the building, hidden in a secret dressing room, ready to surprise Johnny with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The medal was real. The approval was official. Security had doubled. Separate staircases were cleared. Everything was in place for what would have been the most historic moment in talk show history. Except nobody told Johnny. And when he found out, he exploded. "Get him out," he said. "This isn't a political convention. I'm not taking medals from anyone tonight." Reagan was quietly escorted out through the same underground parking garage he'd entered. The medal was presented later, privately, at Carson's home. Because Johnny refused to let anyone, not even a president, turn his farewell into something he didn't control. That moment tells you everything about the iron grip Carson kept on his image. But what happened next reveals just how far he'd go to protect it. Within 3 days of the broadcast, most of the footage was destroyed. Not archived, destroyed. 5 cameras had recorded that night, capturing every angle, every reaction, every moment between commercial breaks. And Carson ordered almost all of it wiped. The raw footage, the alternate angles, the moments when his composure cracked. All of it gone. NBC archivists were stunned. Even the moon landing has more surviving footage than Johnny Carson's farewell. One archivist later admitted there were moments during commercial breaks where Johnny was so visibly emotional he needed 2 full minutes just to compose himself. Moments of vulnerability he never wanted the world to see, so he made sure they never could. But even with all that control, there were things that almost destroyed the show before it even started. Doc Severinsen, the bandleader who'd been by Johnny's side for decades, collapsed that afternoon, just fell down in the rehearsal room. He'd been awake for 48 hours straight, perfecting the music, refining every arrangement, trying to make everything perfect for his friend. The medical staff evaluated him and said, "Don't perform tonight. You're not fit." Doc refused. "Unless I'm dead, I'm leading that band," he told them. "Don't tell Johnny. He doesn't need one more thing to worry about." So Doc took a vitamin shot, napped for 2 hours, and somehow pulled himself together. If you watch closely, you'll notice he stays seated more than usual, hands off solos to other musicians. But he was there, because letting Johnny down was never an option. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, a different kind of tension was building. Jay Leno was trying to visit Johnny's dressing room, just to wish him well, to say something kind before the biggest night of both their careers. But Johnny's assistant stopped him in the hallway. "Johnny's preparing and doesn't want to be disturbed." Then she added, "Perhaps tonight isn't the best night for this conversation." Leno understood immediately, turned around and left. The truth was, Johnny never forgave NBC for choosing Leno over David Letterman. He never said it publicly, never criticized the decision on air. But behind the scenes, he wouldn't even say Leno's name. Just called him the next guy or whoever follows. It was pointed. It was deliberate. It was vintage Carson, polite on the surface, ice cold underneath. That's why Johnny never appeared on The Tonight Show again after that night. Not once. Not ever. But the most shocking betrayal of the night came from his own team. 3 days before the finale, Johnny made a specific request. Tell the audience not to give me a standing ovation at the start. I'm worried it'll make me too emotional to finish the show. Save it for the end. His producer, Fred de Cordova, listened carefully, nodded, and then completely ignored him. Never passed the instruction along. Never told the audience coordinators. Just bet that Johnny would ultimately appreciate authenticity over control. When Carson walked out to that thunderous 2-minute ovation, his surprise was real. He'd expected them to stay seated. You can see it on his face, that moment of being genuinely caught off guard. After the show, Johnny admitted Fred was right. I thought I knew best after 30 years, he told the crew, but I was wrong. That was exactly how it should have started. Still, the most emotionally devastating moment was yet to come. Bette Midler's performance of One for My Baby is remembered as perfect, flawless, heartbreaking. What nobody knew was that Bette had nearly destroyed her voice preparing for it. She'd rented a private rehearsal space 3 days earlier and essentially moved in. Had a cot brought in so she could nap between sessions. Went through 18 different arrangements. Worked with 5 different music directors. Rehearsed so obsessively that by the morning of the show, her voice was almost gone. They put her on 6 hours of strict vocal rest, steam treatments, herbal remedies. It was genuinely uncertain whether she'd be able to perform at all. That crack in her voice during the final lines, the one that seems like pure emotion, was partially vocal exhaustion. She'd pushed herself to the absolute limit, and she never told Johnny any of it. Never wanted him worried. Never wanted credit. Just wanted to give him a perfect moment. But even that wasn't the most guarded secret of the night. Months before the finale, NBC had produced a massive tribute segment. Video messages from Presidents Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Bush. Jack Nicholson, Meryl Streep, Tom Hanks. Celebrities from 5 continents. A 12-minute compilation that would have been the most star-studded tribute in television history. Johnny watched it privately in his office, sat in silence, then said, "It's very nice. Now lock it in the vault. We're not using it." When people asked why, he simply said, "That's not what this night is about." And after the finale, he went further, ordered every copy destroyed, not archived, destroyed. He wanted his farewell focused on the audience, not celebrity connections. So hundreds of the most famous people in the world recorded messages that were never seen and no longer exist. But the real breaking point came in the final commercial break. Ed McMahon had held it together all night. Decades of professionalism, military discipline, the steady sidekick who never cracked. But during that last break, something inside him shattered. He stepped backstage and collapsed into uncontrollable sobbing. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't stop. NBC medical staff got concerned about his blood pressure, advised him not to return for the final segment. There was genuine panic. How do you end Johnny Carson's show without Ed McMahon beside him? Fred de Cordova was frantically managing the crisis without alarming Johnny, who had no idea anything was wrong. Ed overruled the doctors, used cold compresses on his face to reduce the swelling. A makeup artist performed what witnesses called a miracle job. And Ed walked back out, hands trembling but face calm, holding himself together by sheer force of will for just a few more minutes. And then, after the cameras stopped, came the real goodbye. The one the world never saw. The one Johnny never intended to share. After his famous final words, "I bid you a very heartfelt good night," after the broadcast officially ended, Johnny did something unprecedented. Asked the audience to stay, asked all network executives to leave. And then, with only his crew, his staff, and the studio audience remaining, he spoke for 3 minutes without cameras. Said things he'd never say on air. Talked about how television had changed. Not all for the better. Acknowledged his departure marked the end of something that might never exist again. And then he said something nobody expected. "I hope I earned this privilege every night. I hope I never took your trust for granted. And I hope to God they remember what this was before it's all shopping channels and shouting matches." Then Johnny Carson, the man who'd maintained emotional distance for 30 years, invited his entire staff onto the stage. Embraced them. showed them a side of himself he'd hidden from America his entire career, made them promise not to record it, not to speak about it until after he was gone. Tonight was for the viewers, he told them. This moment is for us. That was the real farewell, the one without the mask, the one 55 million people never saw. And maybe that's exactly how Johnny wanted it. The public got their closure, his people got the truth, and the man who tucked America in for 30 years finally let himself be vulnerable. Just once, when nobody was watching.